Today I will tell you a story about a Thanksgiving night when I expected warmth and laughter, yet walked into a scene that felt more like a trial than a dinner. The air outside was crisp, and snowflakes clung to my coat as I hurried up the front steps with a pumpkin pie in my hands. I was late, delayed by traffic, but I thought to myself that perhaps arriving with something fresh from my oven would soften the edges of the evening. I opened the door, ready to hear the hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, maybe even my granddaughter's laughter. For a fleeting moment, I imagined the glow of candles against smiling faces, a holiday reunion that might heal old wounds. But the moment I stepped inside, that illusion shattered. The dining room stretched out before me, the chandelier casting a golden light over a table dressed as though for royalty. At the far end, my daughter Rachel sat, her face pale and tense, her hands folded stiffly in her lap. She did not look like a hostess welcoming her family. She looked like a defendant awaiting a sentence. And then I saw Madison. My granddaughter stood with a posture too rigid for a 19-year-old. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were locked forward, as if she had rehearsed this moment. In her grasp was a thick stack of papers. She slid them across the linen toward her mother. The scrape of paper against the tablecloth was louder than any greeting. I froze at the doorway, the pie still in my hands, my heart slamming against my chest. For one breath, I thought perhaps it was a mistake, some school assignment, something innocent. But no, I recognized the heavy seal stamped at the top of the first page. Bankruptcy. Rick Coleman sat at the head of the table, his expression calm, almost smug, as though this had all been arranged for his entertainment. Beside him, Victoria lifted her glass with elegance, her lips curling into a smile that did not touch her eyes. And then Madison's voice broke through the silence, steady and deliberate. To freedom and a brand new family. 7 words, that was all. 7 words that landed heavier than any verdict I had ever heard. My chest tightened. I stood rooted, unable to step forward, unable to look away. I had walked into a moment that was not about turkey or gratitude. This was not Thanksgiving dinner. This was an execution staged beneath candlelight. The warmth I had hoped for dissolved into a chill that pierced deeper than the wind outside. And in that instant, I knew the night would not end with blessings. It would end with scars. Rachel's voice cracked as she reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Maddie, what are you doing?" The words fell weakly, like a plea that had no ground to stand on. She looked at her daughter as if begging her to remember who she once was, the girl who used to run into her arms after school, the girl who once swore she would never let go. Madison's chin lifted, her shoulders squared. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, did not waver. "You failed, Mom. I will not sink with you. I choose to stand with those who know how to succeed." Her voice cut sharp, leaving no room for softness, no trace of hesitation. She sounded rehearsed, as if the words had been planted in her mouth long before this night. Victoria leaned forward, her smile honeyed, but her tone razor-sharp. "A weak mother drags her family into ruin. You should have recognized your uselessness long ago, Rachel." Her glass clinked against her ring as she set it down, a deliberate sound that punctuated the insult. Rick raised his wine, the amber liquid catching the light. His eyes bored into Rachel's like a predator circling its prey. "She signed the contract. She pays the price. That is all." His words were flat, casual, as if he were reading a grocery list. I felt my stomach twist. Every syllable was like a stone dropped into deep water, pulling my daughter further down. Rachel's face drained of color, her body stiff, as though she had been turned into a statue of shame. Her lips trembled, but she could not form a defense. I gripped the back of a chair, steadying myself. My chest burned with anger I refused to unleash too soon. The humiliation was deliberate. They wanted her broken in front of her own child. They wanted her silence. Rachel tried again, her voice softer, strained. "Maddie, everything I did, it was for you. Every hour I worked, every risk I took." Madison cut her off, her tone sharper this time. "For me? You call missed birthdays and forgotten promises sacrifice? You call drowning in debt a gift? I will not carry your failures anymore." She turned her head toward Victoria as if seeking approval. Victoria stroked Madison's shoulder with theatrical gentleness. "She sees clearly now. A child should not live chained to incompetence. You were never enough, Rachel, and tonight, everyone knows it." Rick leaned back, savoring the spectacle. His voice was smooth, like polished stone. "Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by results, and tonight proves who belongs at this table." I could barely breathe. The chandelier glared above us, casting shadows that seemed to stretch like claws across the tablecloth. The food, untouched, lay like props in a theater, mocking the ugliness of the performance. The golden turkey, the cranberry sauce, the pies, they had been staged for this cruel play. Rachel clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She looked at Madison with eyes that pleaded not for forgiveness, but for recognition. "Maddie, please, don't let them turn you against me. I am your mother." Madison's face hardened. "And what has that ever given me? Disappointment? Shame? You made me believe in dreams that only collapsed. I'm done being dragged down." Her words sliced through the air, final and merciless. Rick's smirk widened. "There it is, the truth from her own daughter. The verdict is clear." My chest swelled with rage. I wanted to shout, to tear the papers in half, to tell them all that none of this defined Rachel's worth. But I forced myself to stand still, to listen, to remember every word. Their arrogance was their weakness, and I would not waste this moment by losing control. Rachel lowered her head, her hair falling forward like a curtain to shield her face. Her shoulders shook, silent tremors of humiliation. Victoria's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. Rick lifted his glass higher, a mockery of celebration. Madison stayed rigid, caught in the role they had forced on her, yet her eyes flickered for just a second, a flicker so faint it might have been my imagination. Still, I saw it, a trace of doubt. But the cruelty did not stop. Victoria leaned toward Rachel, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should be grateful, Rachel. Tonight your daughter is free, free from the shadow of your mediocrity, free from your endless mistakes. She has chosen a family that values her, something you could never provide." Rachel finally raised her head, tears brimming but unshed. She whispered, her voice almost broken. "I never wanted perfection. I only wanted to love her." Rick scoffed, the sound harsh in the silence. "Love does not pay debts. Love does not keep a roof over her head. You gambled and you lost, and now you are nothing but a warning." The table erupted with clinks of glasses, forced laughter, and murmurs of agreement from the Coleman relatives. To them, this was victory. To me, it was a crime dressed as civility. I felt the blood pound in my ears. My daughter had been condemned by her own child, humiliated by the very people who claimed to stand for strength, and in that moment, I understood. This was not just cruelty. It was strategy. They were rewriting her identity, erasing her worth, poisoning Madison against her, and I swore silently, gripping the chair so tightly my fingers ached. They would not win. This was only the beginning. I stood in that dining room, the clinking of glasses still ringing in my ears, and my mind was pulled backward against my will. The cruelty of the moment forced me to retrace every step that had led us here, every decision that had carved the cracks in Rachel's life. To understand this humiliation, I had to remember where it began. Rachel had once been a dreamer, but not the kind who drifted aimlessly. She had vision, determination, and fire. Years ago, she poured her heart into opening a small bakery in Boise, a warm little shop where the smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh bread spilled out onto the street every morning. I still remember the day she unlocked the doors for the first time. She wore an apron dusted with flour, her hair tied back, her cheeks flushed with hope. "This is for Maddie," she told me, her eyes bright. "I want her to grow up knowing her mother can build something from nothing." And for a time, she did. The bakery was more than a business. It was a promise. Families stopped in after church for pies, children spent their allowances on cookies, and neighbors lingered just to talk with Rachel, who treated every customer like a friend. Madison would sit at the counter, swinging her legs and doing homework while her mother served coffee with a smile. The shop glowed with warmth. It felt like a home. But dreams have enemies, and Rachel's came in the form of mounting bills and a ruthless market. Bigger chains opened nearby, and suppliers raised their prices. Winter storms one year destroyed shipments of flour and sugar, leaving her scrambling to keep up with demand. Rachel stayed late into the night, kneading dough until her hands cracked, her eyes red with exhaustion. I warned her to slow down, to ask for help, but she refused. "If I work harder, it will turn around," she insisted. She believed persistence was enough. And then, like a shadow stepping out of the dark, Rick Coleman appeared. He walked into the bakery one afternoon, dressed in a tailored suit that looked out of place among the smell of yeast and sugar. His smile was polished, his voice smooth. He introduced himself as a lawyer with experience in small business financing. "I've helped plenty of owners like you," he said, leaning casually on the counter. "You're sitting on potential, Rachel. You just need breathing room. Let me help you." Rachel told me about him that night. She was nervous, but hopeful. "Rick said he can restructure my loans, maybe even get me better terms. He made it sound so simple." I felt unease crawl up my spine, but Rachel's eyes carried the desperate glow of someone drowning who sees a hand reaching into the water. She wanted to believe it was rescue. Weeks later, she signed. She believed it was a formality, a signature that would grant her more time, more space to grow. I still remember her words to me. "Rick told me not to worry, Mom. It's just paperwork." She smiled faintly, but I could see the fatigue etched into her face. I wanted to argue, but I swallowed my fear for her sake. That decision became the fracture line that split her world apart. The contract was not mercy. It was a cage. Hidden in the fine print were clauses that ballooned interest rates, tied her assets directly to personal liability, and stripped away protections she didn't even know existed. She had walked into his office with trust and left with chains she couldn't see. At first it seemed to work. Rick checked in, assuring her everything was under control. "This is how the system works," he'd say with confidence. "All businesses restructure." Rachel clung to those reassurances. She baked harder, pushed herself more, telling herself that she just needed to ride out the storm. But months later, the cracks widened. Payments doubled without warning. Suppliers stopped delivering because invoices went unpaid. Customers trickled away, sensing instability. Rachel's laughter vanished, replaced by the hollow silence of someone carrying an invisible weight. She tried to hide it from Madison, putting on a smile at home, pretending everything was fine. But I saw her late at night, sitting at her kitchen table with stacks of bills, her hands in her hair, whispering prayers that never reached the ceiling. "Maddie deserves better," she once told me, her voice breaking. "I can't let her see me fall apart." But Maddie saw. Children always see. And that was when Victoria entered the picture. Rachel thought she had found a mentor, someone who admired her resilience. Victoria praised Madison's intelligence, spoke of her potential, and offered invitations that seemed harmless at first. Tea at her home, a weekend outing. Encouragement whispered into Maddie's ear. But beneath the surface, it was poison disguised as kindness. Rick tightened the noose with every passing month, while Victoria tightened her grip on Maddie. Rachel told me over and over, "Rick said he's helping, Mom. He promised this would get better." But I could see the lie written across his face whenever he looked at her. His help was not salvation. It was predation. He had never been there to rescue her. He had been waiting for her to slip. And now, in this house on Thanksgiving night, the truth stood in plain sight. The man who claimed to be her savior had orchestrated her ruin. The contract she believed was protection had become her undoing. The child she sacrificed everything for had been turned against her. As I looked across the table at Rick, I realized he was not simply a lawyer. He was an architect of despair, a man who preyed on Rachel's hope until it became her weakness. And Victoria, sitting smug beside him, had molded Maddie into a weapon, her loyalty twisted until it cut her own mother down. Rachel once believed in the kindness of people. She believed help was given with open hands, not clenched fists. She had trusted, and that trust had been devoured. And as I stood there, my anger hardened into something sharp, something unshakable. This was not just misfortune. This was betrayal built on calculation. And if Rick and Victoria thought they had broken her completely, they had overlooked one thing. They had not broken me. Madison would not meet her mother's eyes. She shifted slightly in her chair and leaned closer toward Victoria, as if the woman who had stolen her loyalty could shield her from shame. Her fingers brushed nervously against the stem of her glass, and her lips pressed into a thin line. To anyone else, she appeared steady, aligned fully with the Colemans. But I noticed something others might have missed, a faint flicker in her gaze, a flash of hesitation before she pulled herself back into coldness. That moment was enough. It told me that beneath the armor, Madison was still a child wrestling with chains she didn't even know she wore. I have lived long enough to know betrayal does not appear in an instant. It grows slowly, nurtured by disappointment and neglect, then fertilized by manipulation. Rachel's failures had created cracks, and Victoria poured poison into those cracks until Madison no longer recognized the difference between love and contempt. I remembered the years when Rachel poured herself into her bakery. She would call me late at night, exhaustion dripping from her voice, telling me about orders she had to fill, suppliers who failed her, bills stacked high on the counter. She believed her work would create a future for her daughter, but in her devotion to survival, she often broke promises. Birthdays celebrated late, school plays she missed, parent-teacher meetings attended by hurried apologies. Madison would wait on the steps after practice, glancing at the clock, only to see the last car pull away while her mother was still trapped at the bakery. I had seen the disappointment in the girl's face when I arrived instead, offering a hug she accepted but did not want. I told Rachel countless times, she needs you, not just the roof you're trying to keep over her head. Rachel always answered, if I don't work, there will be nothing left for her. And that was where Victoria found her opening. She started small, weaving herself into Madison's world. Invitations to dinner, shopping trips, promises that sounded like affirmations but were designed to belittle Rachel. You deserve more attention, Maddie. You shouldn't have to settle for being second in your own mother's life. Madison soaked it in. She was still young, still craving recognition. Victoria's words slid into her heart like honey, sweet at first, but corrosive underneath. Then came the harsher lessons, cloaked as truth. Your mother means well, but she only knows how to fail. She cannot give you the future you deserve. You're too bright to be dragged down by her mistakes. It was subtle, but effective. Each phrase planted doubt. Each gesture of generosity came laced with comparison. Madison began to measure her mother against Victoria's polished world, and Rachel could never win. I watched this unfold from the sidelines. I warned Rachel, but she shrugged it off. Victoria has been kind to Maddie. At least someone is there when I can't be. She did not realize that kindness can be the most dangerous weapon when wielded by someone with intent. Now, as Madison sat pressed against Victoria at that table, I saw the result of years of slow corrosion. The girl who once baked cookies with her mother on Saturday mornings, who once clung to Rachel's apron strings while licking the spoon, now turned her back without hesitation. Rachel tried again, her voice cracking under the weight of heartbreak. Maddie, don't listen to them. I've made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Madison's shoulders stiffened. Her reply came fast, almost rehearsed. Love doesn't erase failure. Love doesn't keep promises. I don't need words. I need stability. She leaned further into Victoria, who nodded approvingly, her hand resting on Madison's arm like a queen guiding her heir. My chest burned. I wanted to reach across the table, grab my granddaughter's hand, and shake her free of the lies she had swallowed. But I knew the grip Victoria had on her was strong, built from years of calculated influence. Rick joined the performance, his voice dripping with false authority. Madison has chosen wisely. She sees what her mother cannot. Weakness does not deserve loyalty. Only strength earns it. Rachel flinched as if struck. Madison did not move. But I saw it again, the flicker in her eyes. A moment of doubt, quickly extinguished. Her loyalty had been trained, sculpted by words that made her believe rejection was empowerment. She thought she was choosing freedom, when in reality, she had been bound tighter than ever. I thought back to something Rachel once told me when Madison was small. She had looked at her daughter asleep in her arms and whispered, "I just want her to be strong enough to survive this world." Rachel's mistake was believing that survival came only through work and sacrifice. Victoria twisted that wish, reshaping it into disdain. She taught Madison that survival meant abandoning the one person who had given everything for her, and tonight, the transformation was complete. Victoria raised her glass once more, her voice smooth, deliberate. "Madison, you no longer have to carry shame. From now on, you will be surrounded by people who build, not those who crumble." Madison's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, but her eyes betrayed her. For 1 second, I glimpsed the frightened child who once asked me if her mother would come home on time, the child who only wanted her family to sit at the same table in peace. That child was buried now beneath layers of manipulation, but she was not gone. I clenched my fists in my lap, forcing myself to remain silent. Every instinct screamed to call out Victoria's venom, to expose the cruelty masquerading as guidance. But timing mattered. Tonight, Rachel was broken and Madison was blinded. My anger alone would not save them. Still, I made myself a promise. If Madison had been raised on poison disguised as love, then I would be the antidote. I would not let the Colemans chain her future to their twisted definition of success. I would not let them erase the truth of who her mother really was. Because beneath Madison's cold words, beneath her loyalty to Victoria's polished world, there was still a heart that had once belonged to us. And I intended to bring it back. I had listened long enough. The clinking of glasses, the smug voices, the humiliation pouring down on my daughter, it was more than any mother could bear. I pressed my palm flat against the polished wood of the dining table, the vibrations of my heartbeat running through my hand. Then, with one firm motion, I tapped my fingers against the surface, each strike deliberate. The sound sliced through the laughter, through the whispered approval, until the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. My voice came low, steady, and sharp. Family is not a marketplace where dignity is auctioned. Family is not a stage for cruelty. And tonight, I see a child being turned into a weapon against her own mother. The air thickened, pressing down on all of us. Rick leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening as though he had been waiting for me to speak. He swirled his wine with deliberate calm and answered, "The weak are discarded. That is the law of life. Your daughter couldn't keep up, and now she pays the price." His arrogance boiled my blood, but I refused to show rage. Rage was what they expected. Control was what would break them. I straightened, my gaze locked on Madison. She tried to hold her expression steady, but I caught the flicker again, the same hesitation I had seen before. "Madison," I said, my tone soft enough to cut through the steel in the room, yet unyielding, "you can choose your future, but do not let others rewrite the truth for you. Do not let their polished words bury what you already know in your heart." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She shifted in her seat, her hand tightening around her napkin until it twisted. Victoria's hand landed gently on her shoulder, guiding her back into silence. But I saw the tremor. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. The chandelier hummed above us. The turkey steamed untouched. Every guest sat rigid, their eyes darting between Rick and me, waiting for an explosion. Victoria broke first, her voice sweet but edged with venom. "Helen, you have no place interfering. Madison is not your responsibility. She belongs here, where she is appreciated, not shackled to a failing mother who cannot even keep a roof overhead." I turned my eyes to her, calm but piercing. "Appreciation is not found in manipulation. You did not lift Madison up. You trained her to despise the one who sacrificed everything for her. That is not strength, Victoria. That is theft. You stole her trust, piece by piece, while smiling at her face." Victoria stiffened, her smile faltering. Rick chuckled, his voice cutting across the table. Save your speeches. You think words change reality? Reality is contracts, assets, results. Rachel lost, and you cannot undo that with grandmotherly wisdom. I leaned closer, my hand pressing harder against the table. Reality is more than numbers on paper. Reality is what Madison will remember years from now when she realizes who stood for her and who used her, and trust me, that memory will outlast your contracts. The room trembled with tension. Rachel sat frozen at the far end, her tears glistening, but her body too broken to move. Madison's breathing quickened. I could hear it from where I stood. Her gaze darted to her mother, then back to Victoria. I pressed forward, unwilling to let the silence reclaim her. Madison, I will not tell you what to choose. That decision is yours. But one day, when the applause fades and the champagne is gone, you will ask yourself if you stood with truth or with lies. And when that day comes, I pray you remember your mother's love, not their contempt. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above the table. Rick slammed his glass down, red wine spilling across the linen like blood. Enough. You dare come into my home and challenge me? You think your speeches matter here? This is my house. My rules. And I decide who stays and who is cast out. I did not flinch. My eyes bored into his. You mistake ownership for authority. A house is not a kingdom, Rick, and tonight, this table is not your throne. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably, their confidence wavering. Victoria's face tightened, her jaw clenched. Madison's eyes welled, though she blinked quickly to hide it. The silence that followed was not relief. It was suffocation, the kind that settles before a storm. Every person at that table knew the ground beneath them was shifting, and in that moment, I knew I had pierced their performance. The Colemans wanted Rachel silent. They wanted Madison obedient. But I had broken the script. I had spoken words they could not erase, truths they could not bury. I sat back slowly, my hands steady, though my heart pounded. The air was thick with unspoken threats, but I no longer cared. My daughter's dignity had been torn apart in front of her own child, and I would not allow them to end the night with their victory intact. The room was still as stone, but I knew the battle had only begun. I slipped my arm around Rachel's shoulders, feeling the tremor in her body as I guided her away from the table. Her steps dragged as though every inch toward the door was weighted with chains. The grand chandelier still burned behind us, spilling its golden light over a feast that had turned into a battlefield. I refused to let them see me falter. My grip was firm, my head held high, even as rage coiled in my chest like a storm waiting to strike. Rachel's voice broke as we crossed the threshold, her words stumbling out between sobs. "Mom, I signed. I didn't understand what it meant. I just wanted to keep the house for Maddie." Her tears streaked down her face, smearing the remnants of mascara into dark trails. She buried her face against my shoulder, ashamed of her own weakness. I tightened my hold, keeping my voice calm, steady, even when my own throat ached. "Rachel, this is not the end. A signature is not a verdict. The truth has not disappeared. It is still here, waiting for its day." Her body shook harder, a soundless cry escaping her lips. Behind us, the room remained silent for a beat, then filled again with the clatter of glasses and murmurs of false triumph. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the night air, the cold biting against my skin like ice. Snowflakes swirled around us, tiny shards of purity falling against the stain of what had happened inside. Rachel stumbled once on the steps, and I steadied her. Her voice, raw and breaking, whispered again, "I thought if I worked harder, if I trusted him, Maddie would be safe. I didn't want her to lose her home. I didn't want her to lose everything." I stopped for a moment, forcing her to look at me. Her eyes were swollen, her face etched with despair. "Listen to me," I said, every word sharp, unshakable. "You were deceived. That contract was a trap. You thought you were saving her, but they used your love against you, and now they are trying to make you believe you are powerless. But Rachel, you are not powerless, and neither am I." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to argue, but she could not. She leaned against me, drained, her body surrendering to exhaustion. I half carried her down the walkway toward my car, each step echoing like a declaration. We were leaving, but not defeated. The house loomed behind us, warm light glowing in the windows, silhouettes moving inside. I could feel their eyes watching, even if the curtains were drawn. They thought this retreat was surrender, but it was not. It was survival. And survival meant time. Time to gather, time to prepare, time to strike back when they least expected it. As I opened the car door for Rachel, I caught faint voices drifting out from the dining room through the crack of the door that had not fully closed. Victoria's tone was soft, but each syllable dripped with disdain. "Don't worry, Rick. That old woman can't change anything. She's just noise." Rick's chuckle followed, deep and smug. "Exactly. Let her comfort her daughter. It won't matter. The papers are signed. The game is over." Their laughter bled into the night, muffled but sharp enough to stab at my ears. I clenched the steering wheel as I slid into the driver's seat, forcing my hands not to shake. Rachel sat slumped beside me, her face turned toward the window, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. I drove away slowly, the tires crunching over fresh snow. Each turn of the wheels marked the distance between us and their poisonous words. Rachel whispered faintly, almost to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I really did fail Maddie. Maybe she deserves more than I could give." The fury inside me surged so hot it nearly choked me. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Do not let their lies become your truth. You stumbled. Yes, you struggled. But everything you did was for your child. That is not failure. That is sacrifice. And one day, Madison will see it, whether Victoria likes it or not." Rachel pressed her hands over her face, sobbing harder now. I reached over, pulling one hand gently away, gripping it firmly in mine. "Do you hear me? They may have won tonight's show, but this story is not finished. We will not let them decide the ending." She nodded weakly, unable to speak, but the faintest spark flickered in her eyes. That was enough for now. The snow grew heavier as we drove, flakes striking the windshield like sparks in the dark. The road stretched ahead, uncertain, treacherous, but I gripped the wheel with a steadiness I did not entirely feel. Behind us, the Coleman house disappeared into the distance, but their words lingered. "She's just noise." They believed I had no power. They believed I was a relic, a grandmother too old to matter. But they underestimated me. Noise can be ignored, but truth cannot. As Rachel leaned her head against the seat, finally succumbing to exhaustion, I stared out into the darkness and made my vow. I would find the proof. I would uncover every deceit hidden in Rick's polished contracts, every venomous whisper Victoria had poured into my granddaughter's ear. They thought humiliation would silence us. They thought shame would bury us. But they had forgotten the strength of a mother and the fury of a grandmother who will not let her bloodline be destroyed. This retreat was not the end. It was the first step toward war. The night after Thanksgiving, I sat at Rachel's kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp cutting through the shadows. She had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from grief. Her breathing was uneven, her body curled like a child's, clutching a blanket as though it could shield her from betrayal. I could not sleep. My mind replayed every word from that table, every insult, every calculated strike. Rick's smug face, Victoria's poison disguised as care, Madison's trembling eyes. I opened Rachel's laptop, the same one she had once used to track orders for her bakery, the same one she now avoided because it carried too many memories of failure. I sifted through folders, bank records, messages, anything that might reveal a thread to pull. And then I saw it. An email Rachel had forwarded to me years ago, one I had barely noticed at the time. The subject line was simple: loan terms clarified. The sender was Rick Coleman himself. My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. The words glared at me from the screen. "The terms are just formality. Don't worry, Rachel. I'll take care of it for you." I read it once, then again, Each repetition ignited a new spark of fury. He had written it plainly, with the arrogance of a man who believed his words would never be questioned. He had coaxed her into signing a contract that would bleed her dry, while assuring her it was nothing but harmless paperwork. I gripped the edge of the printout I had made, the paper crumpling under the force of my hand. My knuckles whitened. This was not just manipulation. It was evidence. Proof that Rick had misrepresented the very contract he now used to destroy her. "Rachel," I whispered under my breath, glancing toward her sleeping form. "You weren't careless. You were deceived." For a fleeting moment, I felt the rush of triumph. I had found a weapon. But the feeling faltered just as quickly. I knew enough about men like Rick to understand one thing. This alone was not enough. A single email could be dismissed, spun, explained away by a skilled lawyer. He could claim she misunderstood. He could claim the message was casual, not binding. He could bury it under his family's influence before it ever saw daylight. I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe evenly. If this was a key, it was only the first. A lock required more than one turn. Rachel stirred on the couch, her voice breaking the silence. "Mom?" she murmured groggily, her eyes half open. "Why are you still awake?" I folded the paper quickly, sliding it beneath a stack of bills. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart. I'm just thinking." Her eyes lingered on me, cloudy with exhaustion. "I never meant to sign away everything. Rick told me not to worry. He said he'd handle the details." Her voice cracked as the words spilled out. "I was so tired, Mom. I didn't want to lose the house. I just wanted Maddie safe." I sat beside her, brushing the damp strands of hair from her forehead. My voice remained calm, but inside I burned with a vow. "This isn't your end, Rachel. The truth is still here, waiting to be uncovered. And I will not let him bury it." She closed her eyes again, tears sliding down her cheeks even in sleep. I returned to the table, unfolded the paper, and stared at it until the words blurred. That one email carried the weight of betrayal, but also the promise of a trail. If Rick had been careless enough to put this in writing once, he might have left more behind, and I would find it. The clock ticked past midnight. The house was silent, the only sound the rustle of snow against the windows. I tucked the email into my bag, close to my chest, as though it were a secret too fragile to leave exposed. They thought Rachel's humiliation was the end, but as I sat in the dim light, my hand tightening around that crumpled piece of evidence, I knew differently. This was not the end. It was the first crack in Rick Coleman's empire, and I would widen it until the whole thing collapsed. The morning after I found Rick's email, I drove downtown Boise with the folded printout still tucked into my bag. The streets were slick with melting snow, shop windows glowing faintly in the gray light. Rachel was at home, too drained to move, her body still heavy with humiliation. But I could not sit still. Evidence needed flesh, and I knew exactly where to begin. I parked near an old stone building, once the proud headquarters of the Valley Trust Bank. The sign above the doors had faded, the gold lettering chipped away by time. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. A few offices had been converted into private businesses. I walked past them until I found the name I was looking for on a small brass plate, Thomas Green, financial consultant. I knocked once. A voice answered, low and cautious. "Come in." The office was cramped but tidy. Stacks of papers lined the desk, and a single heater buzzed in the corner. Behind the desk sat Thomas, a man in his late 60s with thinning hair and weary eyes. He looked up when he saw me. Recognition flickered across his face. "Mrs. Grant," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "I thought I might hear from you someday." I sat down across from him, my hands steady on the edge of the desk. "Then you already know why I'm here." Thomas hesitated. His gaze shifted to the window, where snowflakes slid down the glass. "It's about Rachel's loan, isn't it? The one Coleman pushed through." "Yes," I answered, my voice sharp. I slid the email across the desk, the paper creased from being clenched in my fist. "I have his words, but I need more. I need the truth from someone who was there. Thomas picked up the page, read it, then sighed deeply. That email, it doesn't surprise me. Rick always had a way of making people feel safe while he dug the ground from under their feet. He set the paper down, pressing his palms flat against it as if to hold it steady. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. Tell me what you know, Mr. Green. No more silence. His eyes clouded. For a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, his words were heavy. I was a loan officer then. Rachel came in, desperate. Her bakery was struggling, and she needed time. A standard restructure could have helped her, something fair, something humane. But Rick didn't want fair. He wanted leverage. My chest tightened. He forced you? Thomas nodded slowly. He brought the documents to my desk. Adjustable rates buried under fine print, hidden penalties that no honest borrower could survive. I told him it was predatory. I told him it was wrong. He leaned over me, lowered his voice, and said, "Stamp it, or you'll regret it." His hands trembled slightly, and he clasped them together to still them. I was a father with 2 kids in college. Rick knew it. He made sure I understood that if I refused, I'd lose my job. So I signed. I authorized the loan. And I've carried that guilt ever since. I studied his face. The lines etched into his skin were not only from age, but from years of silence. You watched him ruin her, and you stayed quiet. I did, Thomas admitted, his voice breaking. I told myself I had no choice, that it wasn't my fight, but I saw Rachel come in months later, broken, begging for options. I watched her hands shake as she asked for mercy, and I had nothing to give her. I looked away. That is my shame. The silence stretched between us. My fingers dug into the armrest of my chair. I could hear Rachel's voice in my head, the way she whispered, "Rick told me not to worry." I forced my voice steady. "It's not too late to make it right." Thomas looked at me, his eyes raw. "Do you really think anyone will listen now? Rick has power. Judges, lawyers, even politicians owe him favors. He'll bury me if I speak. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You've been buried already, Mr. Green. Buried under guilt, buried under fear. You've carried his lies for years. But tonight, you can stand with the truth. Rachel doesn't need sympathy. She needs allies. Be one." His lips pressed tight, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. Then slowly he nodded. "I kept copies," he whispered. "Records from that day. Internal memos, notes I wasn't supposed to keep. I told myself it was insurance, but really it was cowardice. I couldn't destroy them even when I wanted to. They're in my storage. If this goes to court, I'll testify." Relief surged through me, sharp and fierce. I sat back, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. "Then you've given Rachel more than she's had in years. You've given her a chance." Thomas's shoulders sagged as though a weight had been lifted. "Maybe it's time I stop hiding. Maybe it's time Rick Coleman pays for the lives he's ruined." I rose, gripping his hand firmly. "It is time, and you won't stand alone." As I walked back into the cold Boise air, the snow still falling, I felt the shift inside me. For weeks, it had been Rachel and me against the storm, but now there was another voice, a witness, a man who had once enabled Rick, but was now willing to expose him. I clutched my bag tighter, the email pressing against my side like a heartbeat. For the first time since that night at the table, I felt the ground tilt in our favor. Justice had found its first ally. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds when I unfolded the Boise Chronicle at my kitchen table. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, but my focus locked on the bold headline splashed across the front page. "From Baker to Burden, How Rachel Grant Failed Her Family." My stomach clenched as I read. The article dripped with contempt, every line crafted to humiliate. They painted Rachel as a reckless dreamer who squandered money, a woman who clung to excuses, and worst of all, a mother who leached off her child's future. Phrases stabbed at me. A parasite living on borrowed time. Her daughter wisely chose a stronger family to align with. The venom was obvious to anyone who knew the truth, but to the public, it was a story designed to stick. And I knew whose hand had penned it, even if the byline said otherwise. Victoria. Her strategy was clear. Destroy Rachel's reputation before we could gather strength. Make her the villain before the fight even began. The courtroom, the contracts, those were Rick's weapons. But the court of public opinion? That was Victoria's arena. Rachel walked into the kitchen, her face pale, her hair tangled from a night of restless sleep. She froze when she saw the paper spread across the table. Her eyes scanned the headline, and color drained from her cheeks. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, no, no." She snatched the paper, flipping through it, her hands shaking so badly the pages crumpled. "They're calling me a failure, a burden." Her knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over faster than she could wipe them away. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, burying her face in her palms. "Mom," she choked out. "I can't take this. I can't face people in town. Everyone will believe it. They'll look at me and see nothing but shame. Maybe it would be better if I just disappeared." Her words cut deeper than any headline. I leaned forward, gripping her shoulders with both hands, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Rachel, listen to me. This is exactly what they want. They want you broken. They want you silent. But you cannot give them that victory." She shook her head, sobbing. "I'm already ruined. Maddie despises me. The town thinks I'm worthless. What's left?" I kept my voice sharp, unyielding. What's left is truth. And truth is louder than lies if we dare to speak it. Do you hear me? They want you to disappear, but that is why we must stand taller. Because the moment you vanish, their victory is sealed. Rachel's breathing quickened. She stared at me, eyes wide with fear and despair. But beneath it, I saw something else, faint, fragile, but present. A spark. I pressed on, my voice steady. "You are not what that paper says. You are a mother who worked herself to the bone to give her daughter a future. You signed papers because you trusted the wrong man, not because you were weak. And I will not let Victoria rewrite that into failure." Rachel whispered, barely audible. "But how do we fight someone like her?" The answer burned inside me. With allies, with evidence, with every ounce of strength they think we don't have. We already have Thomas Green ready to testify. We have Rick's email. And now we will show the world the truth they've tried to bury. Her tears slowed, her shoulders still trembling under my grip. But her eyes, yes, her eyes began to focus again. In that moment, I made another vow. Victoria thought her smear campaign would break us, but all it did was expose her fear. She knew we were closing in, so she struck first, and that meant we were closer to the mark than she realized. I folded the paper, my hands calm, though my blood boiled. "Rachel, remember this. Noise fades, lies crumble, but the truth, we will carve it into stone if we must, and they will regret underestimating us." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard, her fingers curling into fists. It wasn't full strength yet, but it was a start. As she steadied herself, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. Behind me, the world outside looked calm, but I knew the storm was gathering. And this time, it would not sweep us away, it would sweep them. I arranged to meet Madison on the campus of Boise State, just outside the main library, where tall glass windows reflected the pale winter sky. Students hurried past us, bundled in coats, laughing with friends, weighed down by books and the freedom of youth. She stood apart, leaning against a stone pillar, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. Her posture was rigid, her gaze distant, as though she wanted to be anywhere but near me. I walked toward her slowly, keeping my steps measured, steady. When she noticed me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Grandma," she said flatly, "I don't have much time." "I won't take more than I need," I answered, my voice calm. I stood close enough to meet her eyes, though she kept trying to look away. Madison sipped her coffee, then said coldly, "I'm happier now. With them. I don't need this drama anymore. With Mom. With you. With everything." Her words struck hard, but I didn't let them pierce me. Instead, I asked quietly, "Are you happy, Madison? Truly? Or are you just another ornament in their polished house, something they show off to prove their perfection?" Her eyes snapped to mine for a second, sharp, defensive. Then she blinked quickly, lowering her gaze. The steam from her coffee curled in the cold air, but her hands trembled as she held it. "Grandma," she muttered, her voice quieter now. "They give me stability. They don't fail the way Mom did. They make me feel important." "Important," I repeated, letting the word linger between us. "Or useful. There's a difference. To be important means your worth is who you are. To be useful means your worth depends on what you provide. Which one are you in their eyes?" She didn't answer. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. A flicker of moisture gathered in her eyes, but she blinked it back quickly, turning her head away toward the quad where students were passing. I stepped closer, my voice firm. "They've dressed up cruelty as love, Madison. They've taken your pain, your disappointment, and turned it into a weapon against your own mother. And you've believed them because they fed you what you longed to hear. But tell me this, when the day comes that you no longer serve their purpose, will they still keep you?" Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her shoulders trembled. I pressed gently. "Do you think Victoria sees you as her daughter or her project? Do you think Rick looks at you with love or with the satisfaction of winning another pawn?" Madison's jaw tightened, and for the first time, her eyes glistened openly. A tear slipped down her cheek, fast and unguarded. She brushed it away quickly, her voice cracking. "Stop. You don't understand. They give me what Mom never could." "I understand more than you think," I said. "Your mother worked herself to the bone in that bakery for you. She wasn't perfect, no parent is, but she loved you with every ounce she had. And when she fell, instead of helping her back up, they convinced you to believe she was the problem." Madison looked at me sharply, as if my words had landed somewhere she didn't want to admit. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. I saw the little girl who once clung to Rachel's apron strings, who used to laugh in my kitchen while stealing cookie dough. That girl was still in her, buried under layers of Victoria's polished lies. She turned abruptly, her shoulders stiff. "I have to go. I can't do this with you right now." Her coffee cup shook in her hand as she walked quickly toward the parking lot. I stood still, watching her retreat. My chest ached, but I didn't call after her, because even in her silence I had seen it, the crack, the doubt, the single tear she couldn't hide. And that was enough for now. I breathed deeply, the cold air burning my lungs. She wasn't lost, not completely. The Colemans had their claws in her, but the truth was pressing through. And when the time came, that truth would demand to be heard. For now, I let her go, but I whispered to myself, "You'll find your way back, Madison. You will." The Boise courthouse loomed ahead, its stone columns casting long shadows against the pale winter sky. I held Rachel's trembling hand as we walked up the steps. Her grip was cold, her fingers shaking with every breath. I tightened mine, grounding her, refusing to let her fall. Inside, the air was heavy with formality. The wooden benches, the polished floor, the seal of the state behind the judge's bench, everything seemed designed to intimidate. And across the aisle, Rick sat like a man who had already won. He adjusted his tie with a smug little tug, his suit sharp, his chin raised. Beside him, Victoria perched with perfect posture, her back straight as steel, her eyes scanning the room with a predator's calm. Rachel leaned toward me, whispering, "Mom, I can't do this. I can't face them." I looked her square in the eye. Yes, you can, because today you're not alone." The bailiff called the room to order. We rose, and the judge entered, a stern man with deep lines carved into his face, his expression unreadable. Once seated, the trial began. Rachel's lawyer, James Whitaker, stood first. A seasoned man with a gravelly voice and eyes that burned with quiet conviction, he adjusted his glasses and addressed the bench. Your Honor, today we present evidence that my client, Rachel Grant, was misled into signing a predatory contract orchestrated by Rick Coleman. We will show not only the injustice of the terms, but also the deliberate manipulation used to secure her signature. This is not simply a case of poor judgment. It is a case of exploitation. The words filled the courtroom, steady and clear. I watched Rachel, her shoulders hunched, but her gaze locked on James. She drew a breath, her chest rising with something that looked almost like hope. But Rick leaned forward, a smirk curling his lips. Objection, he cut in smoothly, not even waiting for the judge. Your Honor, this is nonsense. Mrs. Grant signed the papers. No one forced her hand. She wanted the loan, she agreed to the terms, and she cannot escape responsibility simply because she regrets it now. His voice dripped with arrogance, each syllable crafted to sting. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Coleman, you'll have your turn. Let the counsel finish. Rick leaned back, but the smirk remained, a silent declaration of confidence. Victoria touched his arm lightly, her lips curling into the faintest smile. James pressed on, unshaken. He lifted a document from his file and held it high. Here is the contract. Note the variable interest clause buried within a sea of fine print. The rates were structured to spike beyond affordability, designed not to aid but to trap. This is not a fair loan. This is a noose. He laid it before the judge, his voice tightening with controlled fury. And here, Your Honor, is an email from Mr. Coleman himself. He wrote to Rachel, and I quote, "The terms are just formality. Don't worry, I'll take care of it for you." That is not transparency. That is deception. The words echoed in the silent room. Rachel gripped my hand harder, her nails digging into my skin, as if she feared the paper might vanish from sight. Rick chuckled under his breath, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. Then he spoke again, louder this time. Your Honor, that email proves nothing. People say all sorts of casual things. It doesn't change the fact that she signed. Her signature is the law. Rachel flinched at his words. I squeezed her hand, steadying her. James straightened, his voice cutting through the tension. The law is not a shield for deceit. A signature obtained through false assurances is not consent. It is coercion. The judge's face remained unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the documents. From the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria shift slightly, her gaze narrowing. She had expected Rachel to crumble. Instead, she was watching evidence take shape, cracks forming in the perfect wall they had built. I leaned close to Rachel, whispering so only she could hear. Breathe. Every word he says for you is a stone back in your foundation. She nodded faintly, her breath shaky but steadier than before. The courtroom air thickened, the silence almost unbearable as the judge leafed through the contract. Pages turned slowly, the sound of paper sharp in the stillness. Finally, he set it down and looked up. We will hear all evidence, he said, but let this be clear. This court will not tolerate interruptions or theatrics. Counsel, continue. James inclined his head, then sat down, his jaw tight with determination. Across the aisle, Rick leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Victoria whispered something in his ear, her nails tapping against the polished wood of the table. Her expression remained composed, but I caught it. The brief flash of calculation, the realization that this fight was not going to be as easy as they had promised themselves. The session ended for the day with tension still hanging like a storm cloud. As we walked out of the courtroom, Rachel's steps were still unsteady, but her grip on my arm had changed. No longer limp, no longer resigned. It was firm, like a woman clinging to the possibility of standing again. I whispered to her, "They thought humiliation would silence you. Today, you proved them wrong." Behind us, I could hear Rick's voice, low and sharp, muttering to his lawyer, and Victoria's heels clicking against the marble floor, each strike like a warning shot. The war had begun. The second day in court began with a chill. The courthouse halls echoed with footsteps and whispers, but inside the courtroom the silence was a knife edge. Rachel sat beside me, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. I kept my arm around her, a steady anchor. James, her lawyer, stood tall as he carried the printed email to the bench. His voice was firm. Your Honor, this email demonstrates clear misrepresentation by Rick Coleman. He assured my client the terms were just formality. It proves she was led into signing under false pretenses. The words struck the room like a bell. For a heartbeat, hope flickered in Rachel's eyes. She sat straighter, watching as James handed the page to the judge. But then Rick's lawyer, a slick man with a silver tie and sharper tongue, leapt to his feet. His voice cracked across the courtroom. Objection! This so-called evidence is nothing more than an unverified printout. There is no digital signature, no official metadata, nothing that proves authenticity. Anyone could have typed these words. This cannot be admitted as valid evidence. His tone was ruthless, dripping with disdain. He turned slightly, flashing the jury a smile as if he had already dismantled our case. The judge's eyes narrowed. He tapped his pen against the bench, then spoke in a measured voice. Counselor, do you have proof of origin, certification, any verification from the server? James's jaw tightened. Your Honor, the content of the email speaks for itself. The language is consistent with Mr. Coleman's past communications. We can... But the judge raised a hand. That is not enough. Without proper authentication, this email cannot be treated as admissible evidence at this stage. The words slammed down like a gavel. My chest burned, but Rachel reacted worse. Her body collapsed against the chair, as if the floor had dropped out beneath her. Her lips trembled, and in a voice that barely carried past me, she whispered, We've lost. It's over, Mom. We've already lost. I turned to her sharply, gripping her hand hard enough for her to feel my pulse. No, I said, my voice low but steady. Not yet. This fight is not finished. Her eyes filled with tears, but I held her gaze until she stopped shaking her head. Across the room, Rick leaned back, smug satisfaction spreading across his face. He tugged on his cufflinks as though the trial were nothing more than another business meeting he had under control. Victoria, seated beside him, allowed herself the faintest smirk. Her posture was immaculate, her calm the mask of a woman who believed she had already won. The judge placed the paper aside and moved on, but the air in the room had shifted. Rachel sat slumped, her hope drained. I leaned closer, whispering directly into her ear. This is exactly what they wanted, to break you in front of everyone. But evidence isn't lost because they question it. It means we need more, and we will get it. Rachel blinked hard, trying to steady her breath. But every door feels closed. Doors can be forced open, I whispered back, and I will not stop until they are. James continued with his presentation, pressing other points, but the blow was heavy. The jury's faces were unreadable, though I caught one man frowning as he glanced at Rick. Perhaps doubt had already begun to creep in. Still, the damage was clear. The Colemans had scored their strike. When the session ended, Rachel clung to me as we walked out into the hallway. Her steps faltered, her head low. Cameras flashed in the distance, reporters waiting for sound bites, hoping to capture weakness. I straightened my shoulders, shielding her as best I could. Victoria passed us in the corridor, her perfume sharp, her voice soft but cutting as she leaned close enough for only me to hear. She'll break soon, and when she does, no one will even remember her name. I turned, my eyes cold. Don't mistake silence for surrender, Victoria. The louder you gloat, the harder you will fall. For the first time, her smile wavered, just slightly, before she swept past us with her heels clicking against the marble floor. Rachel leaned against me, whispering, She's right. I can't take much more. I stopped, made her look at me. She's wrong. They think humiliation is the end, but it can be the beginning. We are not beaten, Rachel, not while we're still standing. Her breath shuddered out, her hand gripping mine like a lifeline. As we stepped into the icy air outside, I knew one thing with certainty. The email was only the first blow in their arsenal, but the truth was still ours, and I would not rest until the world saw it. Not yet, I whispered to myself as snow flurries brushed against my cheeks. Not ever. The third morning in court began under a heavy sky. The air in the Boise courthouse was taut, almost electric, as though everyone sensed a storm was coming. Rachel sat beside me, her shoulders drawn tight, her face pale. Her eyes avoided the judge's bench, as if she were bracing for another blow. I tightened my grip on her hand. Rick entered like he owned the room. He adjusted his tie, exchanged a few confident whispers with his attorney, and shot Rachel a glance filled with quiet contempt. Victoria followed close behind, her heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. She slid into her seat, her lips curving into that polished smile she wielded like a knife. The judge cleared his throat. "The defense may call its next witness." Rick's lawyer rose, his voice smooth. "Your Honor, the defense calls Thomas Green." The name cut through the silence like a blade. Rachel jolted beside me, her eyes widening. I felt my own pulse quicken. I knew that name. The retired bank officer who had once confessed the truth to me in private, the man who had carried guilt for years. He had promised to testify, but we hadn't been certain he would have the courage to face Rick in open court. Now here he was, stepping slowly into the witness box. His back was slightly stooped, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his jaw was set. His eyes flickered briefly to me, then to Rachel, before he raised his hand and swore the oath. Rick shifted uneasily in his chair, though he tried to mask it by crossing his arms. Victoria's smile froze just slightly, like glass catching a crack. The defense lawyer smirked. "Mr. Green, can you confirm that Rachel Grant willingly signed the loan contract in question?" Thomas adjusted his glasses, his voice shaking at first, but steadying as he spoke. "Yes, she signed, but she didn't understand what she was signing. And Rick Coleman knew it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's breath caught. She gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. The lawyer stiffened. "Objection! Speculation!" But Thomas pressed on, his voice gaining strength. "I was the loan officer at First Mountain Bank when Rick brought her papers in. He pressured me to push the file through, even though the terms were designed to fail. I told him Rachel couldn't possibly meet the payments once the interest adjusted. He looked me straight in the eye and said, 'That's the point. Get her on the hook and we'll own her.'" The room erupted. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge's gavel took a moment to quiet the noise. Rick shot up from his seat, his face flushed crimson. "That's a lie," he barked. The judge slammed the gavel again. "Mr. Coleman, sit down." Victoria's mask cracked. She leaned toward Rick, whispering furiously, but her poise had fractured. For the first time, she looked cornered. Rachel turned to me, her lips trembling. "Mom, did you hear that? He said it. He finally said it." I squeezed her hand. "Yes, Rachel, you see, the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Someone always finds the courage to bring it into the light." On the stand, Thomas's hands shook as he pulled a folded paper from his coat. I kept copies, the memos, Rick's signature, authorizing the loan override. I was too afraid to come forward back then. I thought no one would believe me, but I'm done carrying his secrets. The judge nodded to the bailiff, who took the paper and handed it to the bench. The judge scanned it, his expression hardening as the evidence weighed against the Colemans. Rick's lawyer tried to recover. "Your Honor, this man is a disgruntled retiree. He's clearly biased." Thomas cut him off, his voice sharp. "Biased? The only bias I carried was fear. Fear of losing my job, fear of crossing a powerful man like Rick Coleman. But fear doesn't erase truth. And the truth is, Rachel was set up." The courtroom buzzed again, whispers flying. For the first time since this nightmare began, Rachel lifted her chin, tears streaking down her face, but her eyes alight with something stronger than despair. Rick slumped back into his chair, tugging at his collar. Victoria stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched tight, her knuckles white against the polished table. Their confidence had cracked wide open for everyone to see. I leaned close to Rachel, whispering, "Do you see now? Justice walks slowly, but it always walks. And when it arrives, it never walks alone." She nodded, sobbing quietly. Her face turned toward the stand where Thomas sat, no longer a man hiding in fear, but a witness who had chosen truth over silence. The judge tapped his gavel once, his voice cutting through the tension. "This testimony will be admitted. The court will review these documents in full." The weight shifted instantly. For the first time in weeks, the tide was not against us. It was turning. And I knew, as I sat in that courtroom holding my daughter's trembling hand, that this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The final day in court dawned gray, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. When Rachel and I stepped back into the Boise courthouse, the air felt different, less like a cage, more like a battlefield where the enemy had already begun to falter. Rachel's steps were steadier, though she still clung to my arm. I whispered, "This is the day truth speaks." Inside, the gallery was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens and cameras ready to catch the downfall of a family that had ruled this city for too long. Rick sat stiff in his chair, his jaw clenched, his tie crooked as though his hands had trembled when he put it on. Victoria sat beside him, her face a perfect mask, but her eyes betrayed the cracks beneath. Madison sat further back, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The judge entered, and the room rose. His face was solemn, his voice steady as he began. After reviewing the evidence, the testimonies, and the documents provided, this court finds that the contract in question bears signs of deliberate misrepresentation and fraudulent intent. The words echoed through the room. Rachel gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. I gripped her shoulder, my own heart pounding. The judge continued, his voice sharper now. This matter will be referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation into Mr. Rick Coleman and associated parties. In the meantime, Rachel Grant is hereby released from the bankruptcy proceedings related to this fraudulent contract. The gavel struck, final and unyielding. The room erupted. Murmurs spread like wildfire, reporters scribbling furiously. Rachel turned to me, her eyes wide, tears welling as though she couldn't quite believe it. "Mom, we're free?" I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. "Yes, Rachel, you're free." Across the aisle, Rick slammed his fist against the table, his lawyer scrambling to calm him. Victoria stayed seated, her nails digging into her palm, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, her power was stripped bare. The dynasty they built on intimidation and deceit was crumbling in front of everyone. The bailiff called for order, but the news was already moving faster than control. By the time we stepped outside the courthouse, headlines had begun flashing across phones. Boise Chronicle: Coleman family faces fraud allegations. Local TV anchors huddled around cameras, their voices urgent. Rick Coleman, once a respected figure in the financial sector, now stands accused of orchestrating predatory loans. I watched Rachel shield her face as flashes burst in the cold air. For once, she wasn't being shamed. She was being vindicated. And then I heard a sob behind me. Madison. She stood a few feet away, her shoulders trembling, her mascara streaking down her face. She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Rachel froze. The world around us blurred, cameras clicking, reporters shouting. But in that moment, it was only a mother and daughter. Madison choked out the words between tears. I thought they loved me more. I thought siding with them would make me strong, but it only made me empty. Please forgive me." Rachel's tears spilled freely now. She opened her arms and Madison collapsed into them, sobbing against her chest. Rachel held her, her own voice raw but filled with something deeper than anger. "You were lost, Maddie, but you've come back. That's all that matters." I stood beside them, my chest tightening with emotion. After everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the courtroom battles, Rachel still had the strength to forgive. That was the difference between her and the Colemans. They wielded power like a weapon. She wielded love like a shield. Reporters captured every second, but I didn't care. I let the world see this. Let them see a mother's love surviving the storm, even as the empire that tried to destroy her collapsed into rubble. Rick stormed out of the courthouse, shoving cameras aside, his face red with rage. Victoria trailed behind him, her silence heavier than words, her empire of control shattered by one man's testimony and one judge's verdict. Rachel pulled back just enough to look Madison in the eyes, brushing her hair from her face. "We will rebuild. Together, no one will use us again." Madison nodded, still sobbing, clinging tighter. I placed a hand on both their shoulders, my voice firm. "This is not just a victory in court. It's the end of their reign, and the beginning of your freedom." As we walked down the courthouse steps, the cold air no longer bit. It felt crisp, almost cleansing. The cameras followed, but I ignored them. My focus was on Rachel, on Madison, on the fragile but unbreakable bond that had survived fire and betrayal. For the first time in years, I felt hope blooming in the winter air. Justice had spoken, and it had not whispered. It had roared. A month later, the streets of Boise were still lined with snow, but something in the air felt different. The heaviness that had shadowed us was gone. Rachel had reopened her bakery, the small shop on the corner of Grove Street, this time with me sitting behind the counter books. I kept the numbers straight, every receipt in order. No more hidden traps, no more signatures that bled her dry. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls filled the shop, wrapping the room in warmth. Madison stood behind the display case, arranging trays of cookies, her sleeves rolled up, her hands dusted with flour. She had never worked like this before, not with real sweat, not with real care. But now she was learning, one batch at a time. I watched her glance at Rachel, waiting for approval, and Rachel smiled, a tired but genuine smile. It was fragile, but it was real. Customers trickled in, their voices friendly, some offering words of encouragement. "Good to see you back, Rachel." "We missed your pies." She thanked them softly, her voice steadier than I had heard in years. Every purchase was more than a transaction. It was a step back into life. I sat in the corner, notebook open, watching them both. For so long, this family had been battered, tested, nearly broken. And yet here they were, not in a courtroom, not under flashing cameras, but in a bakery warmed by an oven's glow. Madison caught me staring. She wiped her hands on her apron and came over, her voice quiet. "Grandma, I know sorry isn't enough, but I want to prove it here, every day." I studied her face. For months it had carried the hardness she had borrowed from Victoria, but now the edges were softening. "Then don't waste words," I said. "Prove it by standing with your mother, by never letting her fight alone again." Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded firmly. "I will." Rachel walked over, brushing flour from her cheek. She slipped an arm around her daughter, her voice steady but tender. "We lost so much time, but maybe this is how we start over." I looked at them both, my voice low but carrying weight. Justice is not only in the verdict of a judge. It lives here, in truth brought to light, in family ties pulled back from the edge. The Colemans thought they could strip you of everything, but what they could never own was this, the strength to begin again. Rachel's eyes glistened. "Mom, I wouldn't have survived without you." I shook my head. "You survived because you chose to stand, even when you thought you couldn't. Don't give me the credit. Take it yourself." The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered, laughter spilling in with the winter air. The bakery glowed brighter than any courtroom victory, because here there was no performance, no manipulation. Just work, sweat, bread rising in the oven, and a family piecing itself back together. Outside, snowflakes drifted against the windows, but inside the oven's light poured out across the shop, spilling into the street. I thought of that Thanksgiving night, of the cold cruelty in Rick's house, the way they toasted over Rachel's humiliation. And I thought of this moment, warm, defiant, alive. Justice did not erase scars, but it gave meaning to survival. And as I watched Rachel knead dough with steady hands and Madison serve cookies with a shy smile, I knew we had built something stronger than revenge. The fire they tried to burn us with had become the fire in our oven, and its light, golden and steady, reached far beyond our walls, cutting through the falling snow.